Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari, and this is the Great Big History Podcast. In this episode, we start the Roman Republic. And when we talk about Rome, we have to start with political geography. Now, we've talked about geography in every culture we've done. That's where we always start. But we usually have talked about physical geography, the shape of the land, rivers, deserts, mountains. Italy doesn't have anything like that matters that much. It's a peninsula. It's surrounded by water. There's a mountain range that goes through the middle, the Apennines, that don't really divide people all that much. There's the Alps that separate Italy from Central Europe. That is a major boundary for a while. But Italy itself, and there's no Italy yet, but Italy itself didn't have any geography that did anything to develop Rome or the Roman Empire the way, say, the Nile does in Egypt. But political geography, cultural geography in Italy was determinative. And Italy was divided into 4 parts, which is kind of ironic because the first line in Caesar's Gallic Wars is all Gaul. It's the most famous line in all of Latin, but it's all Gaul is divided into 3 parts. Well, Italy was divided into 4 parts. There's the Gauls in the north. There's Etruria, the Etruscans in the northern middle. There's the Latins in the southern middle. And there's the Greeks in the south. And this differentiation of cultures changed Rome, forced Rome to become Rome. There's nothing geographically speaking that makes Rome Rome. Rome is Rome because it decides to become Rome. Why? Well, because of this political geography. So let's talk about how it's laid out. We'll go from north to south. In the northern part is Gaul. It's actually Cisalpine Gaul, Cisalpine, Cisalpine Gaul, Gaul on this side of the Alps. The idea is that these are Gauls, Gauls. Gauls make up most of the Celtic peoples of what is now modern France and part of Western Germany. The Gauls are tough, barbarian people. They're probably the toughest people the Romans meet in the early stages of their lives, the early stages of their cultural history. The Gauls are the great enemy. The Gauls are tall. They stand 5'10", 6 foot. Now remember, Mediterranean peoples stood about 5'2", 5'3", so the Gauls are too big. We get the same thing from the Greeks because the Gauls in the Greek world are called the Galatians. You'll see a bunch of letters from them in your New Testament. But same types of people, they're the same peoples. Big, tall people, fight with a double-handed sword. There's stories about how they would paint themselves blue, how they light their hair on fire using the wax made from mead, because they drank mead instead of wine. And so the honey would make this waxy film, and you'd put it into your beard, and you make a wick out of it. They fought naked because they were crazy, barbarian, berserker, insane, brave people. And they had a Gallic charge. When they fought, they would come running at you. Every one of them came running at you, screaming at you, hair on fire, paint blue, naked. And so most people did not fight the Gauls. They ran away. Now, the Gauls are, and I know other historians who will study the Gauls will dislike this analogy, but it's just to make things simple for History 101 students. But they were considered not civilized. They're dumb. Now, are they really dumb? No, but the idea is they don't live in cities. They don't live in towns. They're not the Greeks. They're not Egyptians. They're not Babylonians. So they're dumb. But they are tough. They are the toughest people the Romans probably fight until they meet Carthage at the very least. They fought, like I said, they fought naked. They fought with these giant swords. They were very tall. Now remember, if you're 5'10", 6 foot tall, you're 6 foot tall, you're going to outweigh a Mediterranean person, a Mediterranean man who stands 5'2", by about 50 pounds. So in hand-to-hand combat, that matters. They would come in with big sweeping swords and just barrel people over. The first time the Romans actually fought the Gauls, they ran away. This happens to the Greeks too. The first time the Galatians, these Gallic people, invade the Greek world, the people just ran away from them. They were just terrified. So the Gauls are tough but dumb. And they're going to dominate northern Italy. They're going to have connections to Gaul itself, what's called Transalpine Gaul, southern France. And their trade and their culture and their marriage and communications go that way. To the south of them are the Etruscans, Etruscans. Etruscans. The Etruscans. Now, the Etruscans are native Italians. The Gauls are foreigners. They were invaded northern Italy. There's a story about the Gauls invading northern Italy that they're in Transalpine Gaul. A bunch of Gauls are just sitting there drinking wine, and they're like, "Oh, this is good wine. Whoa, where did this come from?" And they're like, "Oh, over the mountains." And like, "We should go and get more. Yeah, let's go." And they go over the mountains, and they end up in the Italian Riviera in the spring. And they're like, "This is amazing. We're never going home." And so they just kind of squat. They invite their cousins to come, and they just kind of invade and take over northern Italy for wine. Probably that's not true. It's a great story, but it's probably not true. It's apocryphal. And so the Gauls are foreigners in Italy. But the Etruscans are native Italians. They're a native Italian culture. They are settled in what today, if you know your Italian garden, if you're an Italian garden fan, as Tuscany, good Chianti wine. And the Etruscans are smart. In fact, the Romans are going to say everything they learned from the Etruscans everything they knew came from either the Etruscans or the Greeks. The Etruscans are smart, great goldsmiths is their reputation, great in the arts, but they're weak. They're constantly fighting each other. They're constantly in civil war. So probably what happened is one Etruscan king hired Gallic mercenaries, brought them over the mountains. The Gallic mercenaries won the war and then went into, then said, "Hey, we're not leaving, and we're just going to stay." And the Etruscans just couldn't push them out. Probably that's more likely of how the Gauls ended up in Cisalpine Gaul, in northern Italy. So the Etruscans are smart, but they're weak. They do dominate Rome for about 100 years. They do dominate other parts of Italy for a long time. But there's always just this mess of the Etruscans. And the Etruscans are eventually absorbed. They die out, and their language dies out. It's like Hadrian or Trajan is like one of the last people. He's an emperor, and he's reported to have been like the last man who could speak native Etruscan. That kind of thing. So they're smart, but weak. That brings us to the Latins. The Latins in central Italy are dumb and weak. They live in the poorest part of Italy. Rome is a Latin place. We call them the Latins because they speak Latin. They speak a different language than these other people. Not all Latins are Roman. And not all Romans are Latin. Well, no, all Romans will be Latin, but not all Latins are Romans. Think of it as New Jersey, right? New Jerseyans are American, but not all Americans are New Jerseyans. That's Rome. Rome is one of these people. And when they start off in 800 BC, they are dumb and weak. They're poor. They have no real army. The Latins are agricultural people. They're not smart like the Etruscans are. And they spend most of their time fighting each other. Rome is just one dinky little city trying to stay alive and fighting other Latin societies. And so, in fact, it's going to take the time it's going to take Rome to defeat the Latins is one of the longest periods in its history. And the reason why is very obvious. It's that there's no advantage. The Romans fight the same way as the other Latins do. They speak the same language. They worship the same gods. The other Latins look at the Romans and go, "You're not better than us. You're the same as us. Why?" So it's kind of like the Latins are kind of like the Greeks for a long time, where you just kind of slam away and fight at each other. No one side having much of an advantage over the other. For some 200-300 years, the Romans are going to spend their time just slogging away, trying to just defeat one part of Italy. It was much simpler to conquer Gaul. They'll conquer Gaul in 10 years. They'll take a longer time to conquer Cisalpine Gaul, but Caesar conquers most of Gaul in, 10, 15 years? And he's off to Britain? So it was much harder to defeat the Latins because nobody had an advantage. So Rome is one of the Latins. They're dumb and they're weak. And that brings us to the Greeks in the south. Sicily, Napoli. And the Greeks are smart and tough. I mean, we talked about them. They're smart, right? Philosophy, arithmetic. They borrow all this stuff from the Romans, not Romans. They borrow all this stuff from the Egyptians and the Persians. And they're tough. Alexander uses Greeks and conquers all of Persia. And after that, you've got your Greek Hellenistic states that are conquering things. The Greeks are tough and they're smart. So of all of these people, the Romans are the least likely to have actually won. They should have, by all rights, by all historical trends that we have talked about up to this point, disappeared, been wiped out, been absorbed by another culture, been conquered by some city, absorbed and disappeared. So why don't they? Why aren't they smashed by the Gauls and destroyed? Why aren't they absorbed by the greater culture of the Greeks? Why? And it's because they don't want to be. Rome is surrounded by enemies. In fact, for 100 years, from 600 to 509 BC, they're owned by Etruscans. And so war is a constant state for them. They are going to build not quite a warrior society. Romans are going to spend most of their time farming, but it's a state at constant war. All men need to be able to fight. All men will fight. There's not a will you, won't you. There is a when will you. And so what the Romans do is get rid of that whole idea of you having to be in the military to get citizenship. They just give you citizenship at birth. You are born, you're a boy, you're a citizen. Boom. Even women get citizenship. Boom. So that there's no chance of their children being like, oh, maybe they're... No. They're, boom, citizens. All Romans become citizens at birth. Why? Well, it gives rights and responsibilities from the beginning. It says, fine, you're a Roman citizen. We're going to treat you as a Roman citizen. You're going to get rights. But you are going to do things for Rome. So that Rome is the most important identity for these people from their very act of being born. In some ways, this is like Sparta. And I have a few lectures from historians who make the argument that Sparta and Rome have a lot of similarities. Both will be slave societies in the end. Both will create giant alliance structures. It's that, in the end, Sparta wasn't successful. They couldn't absorb the rest of the Greeks the way Rome was able to absorb the rest of the Italians. And so you get rights and responsibilities from the moment you're born. And for boys, that's going to be serve in the military. But it's also follow the law. It's also pay the taxes. The second part of that is it didn't matter if you were rich or you were poor. You're rich or you're middle class. You're all going to serve. The patricians and the plebeians are going to join the army and serve the state. They both matter. And they're going to create an army in which both matter. The patricians and the plebeians are going to join the army and serve the state. And that is where you find dignity. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But as an adult male, you're able to say, I served Rome. This is what I did for Rome. The idea that you could be a consul, the head of the executive branch, and get 5 deferments from serving in a war is ludicrous. It would never happen. Women become citizens. And this gives them rights and protections. And we'll talk about this a little bit. But this is especially education. Girls are going to be educated in Rome. They're going to have a marriage veto. They keep their family name, which is very important. Because it means they keep their identity. They keep their identity before their marriage. They keep their connection to their home family rather than be absorbed by their husband's family. They have a right of inheritance. They can own businesses. They have legal protections. Now, why would they have these? Well, the men are off at war. Husbands go off to war, and they might be off for a summer. They might be off for a year. And as time goes on, they're off for longer and longer. Usually it could be about a year. And as Spain, France, North Africa become the territories, like it's one thing when you're fighting other Latins. That's like the Greek world. You fight, you spend about a week, and you have a battle, and then you come home. But when you're off in France, you're gone for a year, 2 years. I think the idea is they could claim you for up to 6 years. 20 years? Could they claim you for 20 years? But they never made you serve more than 6? There's 6 years involved. It might be that you didn't serve more than 6 years in the field. But you'd be gone. You go to Spain, you're gone for a year or two. It's too far. It took you 6 months just to get there. And so women had to be able to run those businesses. Women had to be able to sue contractors, other businesses, people who don't obey the contracts. Women needed to be able to have legal rights, to have a banking account, to have their own money, to be able to write checks. Those whatever the equivalent was in the ancient world. The idea was to be able to pull on credit and money. They had to be, because their husbands, their sons were gone. And remember, service to the state was most important. So you were the jerk if you said, oh, all of your men are gone, well, I'm not paying any of my contracts. You suck, you're a woman, you can't sue me. Like the state went, no, the men being at war is the most important thing we have. So we need to create a society that protects that. And so the idea was to give women education, rights, legal protections in order for them to be able to serve in the male stead when their husbands were away. The culmination of kind of women importance is the Vestals, Vestals. These were priestesses. These were women who served female gods. They had a religious importance. And there was lots of rules about, you have the Vestal virgins who who had to be virgins and stay virgins. So a man who has sex with a Vestal Virgin was in a lot of trouble. The idea is that even in Roman society, which is very patriarchal, men have a lot of power, an extreme amount of power. Women still matter, religiously, economically, socially, they matter. The result of this is that Rome needs people to fight. People die in battle. People just die. So Rome is constantly needing more people. And Roman citizens want to have a say. In 450 BC, they actually had a sit-down strike where the rich people got together and said, we're going to declare war on the Gauls. And the poor people marched out to the field of Mars and sat down. And the rich people said, but what are you doing? Like, we're not going to war. We're just sitting here. We're going to wait. And the rich people said, but we're at war. Like, we're not at war. You're at war. We didn't have any say in that. And they go, but the Gauls are coming. They're going to take your stuff. And the poor people say, we don't have any stuff. They're coming to take your stuff. And the rich Romans say, what do you want? What will get you to move? And the poor people say, we want a say. We want to have rights. We want to have the law treat everybody the same. And the rich Romans didn't like that idea, but they did it. And that's a revolution in law. The idea that everybody will be treated the same. So what we get out of this is the Republic. We don't get a king. In fact, the Romans will overthrow an Etruscan king and create the Republic, ruled by the Senate, which is old, wealthy men. In fact, Senate literally means old, wealthy men. And those are going to be the most important men in the society. It's about 200 or so people in the Senate from all the big families. And the idea is they rule by consensus. They're all related to each other. They all know each other. They're all more or less equally wealthy. And the idea is that you don't need a vote. We can agree on stuff. So consensus. The Senate will run on consensus. Now that has an advantage. The advantage is everybody will agree. Minorities get protected. And majorities get what they want. So the majority says, all right, this is what we're going to do. This is what we agree we're going to do. We're the majority. And the minority says, well, we don't like that. Now, the idea is the minority will say, we don't like X, Y, and Z about what you want to do. And the majority says, okay, well, let's negotiate. Let's talk about it. It forces the majority to negotiate with the minority. They don't just vote and 51% equals what they do. They want 100%. And so to get that, it means the minority can put the brakes on things, not stop it, because the majority is still the majority. So the majority gets what it wants, but the minority gets its protections. So the majority never gets all that it wants. Obamacare is our best example of this in the last 10, 15 years. President Obama was elected in 2008. Democrats were elected in 2008. And part of what they were elected on was universal health care. And so what should have happened is the majority goes in and says, okay, this is what we're going to have. We're going to have universal health care. Okay? And this is what we're going to do. And the minority, if this was the Roman Republic, would say, okay, we understand you won. You're going to get universal health care, but we have objections to these 4 things. We have objections to making rich people pay for it alone. 2, we have an objection to that poor people don't have to have a job to have it. And 3, we object that it covers female health care and reproductive health care. And the majority then goes, okay, let's talk about this. And they hash it out over 6 months. And boom, you get a bill that has universal health care. But instead of taxing rich people 40%, it taxes them 18%. And because the Democrats, a large percentage of their voters are women, there's going to be birth control is going to be paid for, but abortions won't be, because that's a Republican sticking point. And the idea is that you have this negotiation that gets you to consensus. And that's how the Senate's supposed to work. But notice the Senate is just old rich people. It's just patricians. Where are the people? The people want to have a say. Well, they're going to be represented by the tribunes. Tribune. Excuse me. Tribune. B as in boy. Tribune. These are elected representatives of the people. Rome is not a democracy. Neither are we. We are a republic. We are based on this republic. Rome is a republic. The people do not vote on the laws. The Senate, the old wealthy men, were never, ever, ever going to let regular people have a total say, outnumber them, outweigh them. The rich wanted to stay in power, but they understood they needed the support of the people for the wars, for Rome to expand, or simply for Rome to exist. So the deal is tribunes, representatives of the people. And so Rome is divided up into districts, and each one of those districts will have a representative. We'll have an election, and that representative will end up in the Senate, and will sit there and listen and occasionally speak. And they had a veto, V-E-T-O. Now, that's not the same veto we have, like the presidential veto. It's not, because the tribunes don't really do law. What they do is basically act as a poll. So the Senate says, okay, we're going to have a new law. That law is we're going to have some trickle-down economics. We're going to have 0% taxes on rich people, those who make over $1 million a year. But we're going to triple the taxes on poor people, those who make under $1 million a year. That's a great idea, right, guys? And everybody in the Senate's goes, like, yeah, that's a great idea. Oh, I make $5 million a year. I make $20 million a year. Ah, ha, 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 ha. This is great. Okay, let's vote. No, hold on. Tribunes, we will vote tomorrow. Tribunes, this is the law that we're going to decide on. Please go back to your districts, call an assembly, and tell the people what we're deciding, what we're thinking about doing. And so the tribunes do that. They go back to their areas, and they call an assembly. A bunch of people will show up, and they'll read out what the law is and then explain it. And you get one of basically 4 reactions. Woohoo! Yes, I love it. Which means when they go back, and, well, we'll talk about that. There's 2, which is, I guess it's pretty good. I don't see a reason why I shouldn't support it. Then there's the, I don't know. I just don't really like it. I don't hate it, but I'm probably losing some way about this. And then there's number 4, which is, if you do this, we're going to burn down the freaking city. We're going to murder all the rich people, burn down the city, and we're going to all speak French for a while. And so the next day, the tribunes come together, and the Senate gets up and says, we're the Senate. We could do whatever we want. But tribunes, please tell us what the people think. And you get one of those 4 reactions from the tribunes. And if it's, yeah, we totally support it, it's going to pass. If it's, yeah, I guess we're okay with it, it's going to pass, but maybe with a couple of, instead of tripling those taxes, it's 70% increase in taxes. Then there's the, I don't really like it, which means we'll probably table it, maybe work it out a little bit. Maybe instead of 0 taxes on the rich, maybe 10% taxes on the rich. We'll figure, And then there's the, we're going to burn this place down. And that's the veto. That is, the people will burn down Rome and murder the rich people if you do this. And that's basically how the veto works. Is because the senators go, oh, okay, people hate it that much. I guess we really shouldn't do it. And so the tribunes are acting as a poll, a way to make sure that the senators, the old rich guys, know how the people feel about a thing and whether they have support for it. Because you have to remember, and this is important, it's very different from our society. Rich and poor lived in Rome. Everything was public, but then you had to walk home. You have to remember this. You're a senator. You're a rich guy. You go to the Senate. You spend your day screwing poor people. That all gets written down. It then gets posted. It then gets proclaimed through the streets. And then you have to walk home. You have to go home through the people who you just spent the day screwing. Then you have to go to your nice house, eat a lovely lunch and or dinner, and then go to sleep. What do you think is going to happen? Well, what's going to happen is around 3 a.m. Hey, rich guy. Hey, rich guy, wake up. And you'll wake up and you'll be like, oh, what the hell is this? Servants, go get the door. What? What's that smell? It smells like something's burning. My house is on fire. And you come running out with your wife and your kids. And there's a bunch, 12, 15, 20 people there with their paddles and their work-a-day things. And they're sitting there going, so, see that you voted to raise our taxes 90%. Ignored our tribune, eh? And what do you think happens next? No, they don't kill him. Because if they kill him, then it's a revolution and crazy stuff happens in the Senate and the old man. No, you just beat the snot out of him. You beat this wealthy guy to remind him that you need poor people. You need these people. Remember, they could have killed him. They've all been in the army. They have military training. They're just going to beat him senseless and burn his house down. To remind him that Rome is 98% poor people. Now, what will happen over time is, especially in the 100s BC, the rich will just leave Rome. They'll start leaving Rome, especially once the emperor shows up. They're going to just start buying palatial estates out in the farm country and stay out there, like get away from the rabble as much as they can. But in the early days, everybody lived in the city, and you lived with these people. You walked by these people, and you remembered that they outnumber you. There's always fear in the Republic. Always fear in the Republic. Of the poor people. They're too important to the society. And they're angry. And they have military training. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So the final part of the Republic is the 12 tables. So we have the Senate, we have the tribunes, and now we have the 12 tables. The 12 tables are the Constitution. They are the rules of society, and they will apply to everyone. Remember when I started this and I said, what do people want? And they're like, we want the rules to apply to us equally. Well, the rich Romans give in on that. Now, you should understand that the rich Romans also created a legal system that protected them. This legal system, more or less, we have with lawyers and juries and judges. Now remember, the lawyers are going to be rich guys. The judges are going to be rich guys. But the idea was the law said the penalties for breaking the law were the same for everybody. It tied everybody together. And the 12 Tables was a written constitution. It was posted in Rome and in other cities as Rome will expand. And it was anyone who could read or who could find somebody who could read could point to that and say, number 25, that applies to me. Number 36, that applies to me. This guy killed my pigs. I want restitution. And here it is, right here. It's written on stone, making it for the reason that it makes it hard to change. These are going to be the rules for society that are going to govern everyone. And the idea was to govern everyone equally. Now, the law literally says all people are equal, but rich people are always going to benefit from being rich. Always. Call it the Oj Simpson Rule. There is no rule that rich guys don't go to jail. But Oj Simpson was able to spend so much money on lawyers and experts and all kinds of stuff that he was able to get away with not going to jail. To get a jury to not convict him. He spent millions of dollars to stay out of jail. And so the idea is, yes, will the law treat everyone equally? In practice, no. But in theory, in the word of the law, it does. And that's a big move. Remember, that's a huge change from Babylon, from the Code of Hammurabi, which explicitly says who you are dictates what kind of penalty you have. This is a leveling out of all of that. So, and finally, so those are the three parts of the Republic. And what is the motivating culture in it? This idea of what's called natio, N-A-T-I-O, where we get nationality from. Natio is going to be the cultural value that goes right through Rome. And it's the idea that anyone can be a Roman citizen. We have this. We believe this. We have taken, my own experience is this. My own cultural heritage comes from all over Europe. And they all became Americans. The idea is anyone can become a Roman citizen if you fight for Rome and you act Roman. And this is a way for non-Romans to become Romans. And this is new. The Spartans never do this. So for all the similarities that historians have between the Spartans and Romans, the Spartans never do this. You could not become Spartan unless you were born to Spartan parents. The Greeks don't do this. Why? Because they don't want to share their democracy. Athens, which is the most open democracy the world has ever seen, didn't do this. It was very hard to be Athenian. And it got harder. It got more restrictive as time went on. Because my vote counts for less with every new person that becomes a citizen. And so the Persians we talked about, yeah, you could fight for Persia, but you were never going to be Persian. You were never going to become part of that elite. You were never going to be absorbed in. You were always a quote-unquote slave to the Persians. You were always a conquered people. That's one reason why the Greeks revolt, the Ionian Greeks revolt, because they said, I'm tired of this. I'm done with this. We're getting treated like crap here. Because we're the conquered people of a conquered people. Like, no one respects us. This is new. And this is right here. Star it, underline it, box it. This is what allows the Romans. This is the innovation that allows the Romans to conquer the world. This is the way the Romans will build an empire. Because they, in the end, won't care. Now, they'll have fights over this. There's a whole series of wars called the Social Wars, in which Romans tried to stop other Italians from becoming Roman. They had a whole civil war about it in the Italian peninsula. But in the end, the idea of natio is anyone can become a Roman citizen if you fight for Rome and you act Roman. Which brings us to the Legion, which will be our next episode. The Army of Rome, of the Roman Republic. All right. Thank you.